Thank you for joining us today. It is great to be able to bring over 200 colleagues together at the beginning of the new year. We have planned the day to be interactive, and the afternoon sessions will build on the morning session. This year, all our updates will focus on the quality of teaching, learning, and assessment. Our quality improvement and assurance leads and facilitators worked extremely hard to get ready for today's sessions. And I wanted to offer special thanks to Cara Turner, Martin Jackson, and David Sutton-Jones and the teams for planning and developing resources. Thank you. Before we start, please mute your microphones and put your questions in the chat. While we are presenting, we are unlikely to be able to address questions in chat, but we will add them to the frequently asked questions from the day and publish responses after this event. All sessions, apart from the afternoon workshops, will be recorded and available via Tutor Training Hub within next 2 weeks. The morning sessions are delivered by Quails to the regions. Yorkshire and Humber will join Midlands, and the National will join Northwest in absence of the Quails. Scotland will be joining Northeast. Thank you for helping with that. The sessions will focus on best practice in learning outcomes, assessment, and feedback. The afternoon workshops will be delivered to tutors in subject groups. We could not cater for every subject here, so please join the Zoom team that is the closest match to your subject area. English tutors will be joining via the maths link, so please make sure you do that if you are an English tutor. Education staff are invited to the afternoon workshops led by the Canvas team and will focus on getting to know the new Canvas blueprints and managing quality of the courses. We hope you will find the workshops useful. Today's sessions will be followed by a program of further training developed by Canvas team for tutors. Education staff are welcome to join them too. The details will be shared shortly via all the regions, and the Quails and heads of regions have the information already from us. Please do use the lunch break to take a break from the screen. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, some of the senior leadership team couldn't join us today, but we've got a wonderful video from Katie Easy to welcome us at the start of the day. Just bear with me.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Autumn Term Association Development Day. I'm really, really sorry that I'm unable to be there today. I'd hoped to be there, but personal circumstances mean that it's just not possible. We know that things are really busy at present, and in some instances quite challenging. So perhaps more than ever, we really do appreciate the time that you're committing to this opportunity, and we hope that you find it to be of real value. Today, the focus is on learning outcomes and how they to deliver assessment and our feedback to learners. And we've decided to focus on this and we've identified it as a priority area for development from information gathered from lots of different places, including internal quality reviews, from observations, and from feedback from our tutors. So the day is going to allow lots of opportunity for interaction, and in the afternoon, tutors are going to be able to work with colleagues in similar subject areas. Now, this is something that tutors have said for some time they'd really welcome, and we're trying to respond to that feedback. We know that learning outcomes are vital to our work. Without them, we can't determine learners' start points and we can't measure their progress. And this isn't just something that we have to do for our funders, it's something that's central to good teaching and learning, and we want to excel in this area. The best learning outcomes provide that framework for high quality planning and delivery. It informs learner expectations about the course, it provides them with a means of understanding the course offer before making an application, and it enables us to differentiate appropriately based on learner needs and interests, and fundamentally it allows us as teachers and educators to really evidence the distance that our learners are travelling in their learning. From my perspective, community learning is under great scrutiny at the moment there, any time that I can recall in recent history, and we need to have absolute confidence that we are delivering the best that we're able to. Most importantly, because that shows our learners that they have the right to that excellence, which we know and we all believe passionately about, but also because we need to be able to show our funders just how good our profession is, and why they should be funding it. And one of the ways that we do that is through ensuring a really high quality learner journey, which includes clear and appropriate learning outcomes. As the day progresses, it would be really good to hear examples of best practice that emerge so we can share those and we can develop communities of practices as we move forward. But to end, I really hope that you enjoy your day. I hope that you make the most of the time together to share practice and ideas and enjoy working together with colleagues from across the organisation. So I'll pass you over to colleagues now, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Angie, are you on the call?
I am indeed.
Hello, Angie. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Angie Evans. I'm the People and Culture Director, and I haven't met a lot of you because I'm not joined. I haven't been with us that long, and I've certainly never been to an ADD. So I know that recording was a little bit difficult to hear. I was struggling myself. And maybe we can attach it to the chat so you guys can have a personal listen to it. That might help. I just wanted to thank you again for joining today. I think it's a great opportunity, if nothing else, for you guys to spend time together with colleagues, which is a fantastic opportunity to share best practice. So I just wanted to wish you a really successful day. I will dip in and out throughout the day to some of the sessions just to educate myself on what these days are all about. And I'll see you at the close of the session as well. And Justina did mention some thank yous, but I also want to thank her and Priya and the whole quality team for all the work they've done to pull this together. It's no mean feast trying to get these things organized. So for me, just wanted to introduce myself, but also just to wish you a really successful day. So have a great one, and I'll see you at the close.
Thank you very much, Angie. Thank you. We've got a short information session from Tracy Lawman from HR before we move over to the morning sessions focusing on teaching, learning and assessment. Tracy, are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Justina. So hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Lawman. I'm Senior People Experience Manager at the WEA. I'm just here for a very brief update in regards to internal recruitment at the WEA. So as you know, in recent years, we've moved to a true hybrid provision. And since the pandemic, 50% of online courses have been maintained. And therefore, all colleagues can consider teaching any vacancies that we have for the online courses, irrespective of the location or the region in which you work. Previously, sessional vacancies have been advertised via our website, so there's the opportunity there for internal candidates, but also external candidates to apply. But in order to prioritise and improve the experience of our existing pool of brilliant tutors, we've got so much skill and experience within the WEA already. As of the beginning of August, we've started to advertise our teaching vacancies internally only on the WEA intranet. We'll do that for 1 week, and that gives further opportunity to our sessional colleagues and for us to utilise the wealth of existing skills and knowledge already in place at the WEA. So just to quickly step through what we will be doing going forward and what we've been doing since the beginning of August. All of our internal teaching vacancies will be advertised on our internal vacancy page, which I'll quickly bring up after I've finished talking. And that'll be published around about 2 p.m. every Monday and close the following Monday around about 12 p.m. Currently, we've got 5 vacancies across the UK that are advertised. If as a sessional colleague, you're interested in one of those vacancies, then it's a really quick process to apply and put your interest forward. It's a case of completing an expressions of interest form and just telling the hiring manager a bit more about yourself, your experience, your skills, and your availability to teach. From there, the hiring manager will review completed expression of interest forms, and after the closing date, get back in touch with suitable applicants and arrange a skills match discussion. I just quickly want to bring up the internal recruitment page, just so you're clear on where it is and if there's any questions that you have after I come off that I'd do in the future, please do get in touch, give me a call, and I'll be happy to support in any way. So I'm just sharing at the moment the homepage of the intranet. If we're looking for internal vacancies, then we go to the landing page for HR, which is under our structure. And then there's a number of buttons down the side. I can't actually get down to. Let me just, okay. So under the new opportunities button, if you select that, then that's where everything is published every Monday. As I said, currently we've got 5 vacancies advertised in the Southwest, Midlands and Northwest, and there's a variety of roles there. You can see just on the page here, this is where you need to go to complete the expressions of interest form. And if you do have any questions about the role, then please just get in touch with the hiring manager or the recruitment team, and we'll be happy to support and answer any questions that you may have. That was just a very brief overview of internal recruitment and what's happening going forward. So that's everything from me. Thank you, Justina, and have a brilliant day, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Thank you. We've got just 5 minutes left before the next session starts. So if you've got any questions at this point, please put them in the chat. If you remember the questions later on, please add them to your feedback form that we would like you to complete at the end of the day. The link to it will be shared during the sessions through the day. Thank you very much for your time, and please make sure that you make the most of the day. Thank you very much and have a lovely day. See you later on at 10 to 4.
Okay, so we've got the structure of today. I thought I'd just outline what we're doing. So we have 3 parts to this morning and breaks in between. I haven't scheduled a specific time for those breaks. So we can be quite flexible in terms of what we cover. If there's anything that we want to take a little bit longer, we can do, and we can take our breaks a bit later. And if there's anything that we want that we get through really quickly, that's fantastic, and we might have a slightly earlier break. So I didn't put times in for those, so we could be flexible. But our lunch will be at 12:30, so we need to make sure that we are finished for 12:30. So that's what's happening this morning. And in the afternoon, you will have a workshop to attend. So for education staff, there is a specific education Zoom that you'll be going to. And for our tutors, you will be going into your subject areas to do some collaborative work in those workshops. So that's 1:30 till 3:45. And then there's an afternoon kind of plenary or wrap up that we'll attend at 3:45 as well. We may finish a little bit early in those afternoon sessions just to allow everyone to have a little break before that wrap up. So I'm delivering the afternoon workshop on the literature and history. So if you teach any kind of literature or history type courses, you'll have me. Yeah, if you don't teach any of those, it won't be me, it'll be someone else. But I'm sure you'll have a great afternoon. Okay, so some of you may well be familiar with something called constructive alignment. I dig deep for some of these theories and ideas into my own teacher training background. And this one, I think, really neatly kind of encompasses and sums up what we're looking at today. So I'm going to just give you a moment to have a look at that and have a read. And if I could see some thumbs up when we've done that using the reactions, that would be fantastic. Great stuff. I can see some thumbs up coming through. Brilliant. Great stuff. So hopefully some of you may remember constructive alignment, and if you've not heard of it before, don't worry. It's a nice way of visualizing really this slide, how things connect in our classroom for our learners. So we plan our outcomes and our activities and our assessments, and they all align, they all connect, so that we can really give our learners a great experience, and we can measure progress, and that they can articulate progress that they're making too. So with constructive alignment, it doesn't really matter whether you start with an activity or how you want to assess your learners, as long as they relate to our learning outcomes. So they can be outcomes or objectives for the course, or it might be for a specific session that you're teaching. So I just thought this was a really nice way to kind of summarise what we're doing today, and that each of our 3 sessions will look at each of these areas to be able to help us with our planning for our sessions. Okay, you will get a copy of all these slides, so they'll be uploaded to the Teacher Training Hub, or the Tutor Training Hub, sorry, it's called, isn't it? Okay. So we're going to move on to part 1. Part 1 is about our outcomes and objectives being SMART. So we have some learning objectives for you for this part of the session. Have a read of these, please. So here we have some SMART learning outcomes for this part of the session that we're looking at. We have a verb to start our outcome, which we're going to look at in a little while, that Bloom's taxonomy we'll have a little look at. And the verbs are something that we can use to measure the progress that we're making. So by the end of this first part 1, we should be able to define what a learning outcome or objective is. We should be able to explain the benefits of using SMART outcomes, and we should be able to have evaluated our learning outcomes, and also had a go at constructing an outcome that we might use in our own teaching. Are there any questions or thoughts on what we're going to cover in this first session? Feel free to raise your hand or pop something in the chat. Okay, thanks, Helen. I can see you said they're not time bound. So if I was to write by the end of the session, you will, we may have made those more time bound. Fantastic. So this is what we're doing in today's first part 1. So I've got a little task for you to do. Have a look online for the definition of these terms, or if you've got a definition in mind that you use, have a look. You don't have to pick all of them, maybe pick 1 or 2. And in the chat, if you could pop your definition of what you think a learning objective, a learning outcome, or a SMART objective, or Bloom's taxonomy verb is. If there's some great definition online, that might be good to share. So pop them in the chat. You've got a couple of minutes to have a look at those. So one of the things we want to make sure of is that we're all clear on the language that we're using. And it can be confusing sometimes, where on one document we might have objective, and on something else we might have outcome. We might call it a session objective or a session outcome as well. So we just want to make sure that we're happy with what these things are before we make a start. You can see people putting lots of examples of Bloom's verbs. This is wonderful. So I can see people putting, you know, outcome and objective can be interchangeable. Absolutely. You know, sometimes we call it an outcome or an objective. Sometimes we have course outcomes and then specific objectives in each session to meet those outcomes for the course. So sometimes you can differentiate that way. For the purpose of today, we're going to think about outcomes and objectives as meaning the same thing, okay? So on some courses that you deliver, you might see, especially if it's an accredited course, you might see a learning outcome for the course along with an aim. And you might then see objectives for the session, and that's okay too. But what we want to do is make sure that any of those, either an outcome or an objective, is SMART and is clear and measurable. So for today's session, outcome, objective, learning, session, you know, we're going to use those interchangeably. Brilliant. So many people popping stuff in the chat. I can't keep up. That's fantastic. Thank you. I know there's lots of us on the call today. So 61. So it's great to see so many people participating and getting involved. Brilliant. Okay. So if you have had a look in the chat, then we've got an objective, a measurable skill, or some knowledge that a learner is expected to achieve or to be able to demonstrate by the end of a course or a session. Outcome, very similar. We've got the acronym there, SMART, for our objectives, to make sure that they are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic or relevant, and time bound. So thank you to those of you that put that in there. And we've got those Bloom's taxonomy verbs, and people have been giving great examples of different verbs you might use, as well as the different levels of thinking that they relate to on that taxonomy. So fantastic. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. It's great that we've got such a wealth of knowledge here. Sometimes these sessions, you might think, oh, I've done this and I understand this. So that's fantastic. What we want to make sure is that everyone can share their best practice. So we're going to have some opportunity later for you to do that as well. Okay, so effective session objectives, learning outcomes and learning objectives, don't use vague terms, okay, because it's really difficult to measure. So terms like understand, know, appreciate, to become familiar with. See that one quite a lot. To become familiar with how to use an adjective, for example. That's really tricky to measure. How do you know if someone's familiar with it? What have they done to show you? To learn or be aware of. So some of these terms are quite vague, and they make it really difficult to measure progress. And it's not just us measuring progress, it's the learner being able to measure their own progress, to be able to articulate their own progress as well and say, I have specifically been able to explain this particular thing, which it said I would do that at the start of the session. I couldn't do it at the start of the session. And now, after undertaking this session, I can explain this particular thing. So yes, these terms are quite vague and we don't need those in our planning. Okay, any questions before we move on to this video? Have any thoughts that anyone would like to share? No. Okay, fantastic. So this video is about Bloom's taxonomy. By the looks of things, lots of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, and that's fantastic. This will be a little refresher for you. If you've not heard of it, or it's been some time since you've looked at Bloom's taxonomy, have a look at this video. What you're going to do as you watch this video, please, is to make a note of the 6 levels of thinking that we have on Bloom's taxonomy. So your task, as you're watching this video, is to make a note of those 6 levels of thinking. At the beginning of the video, it goes quite quickly, and when it talks about the 6 levels, and then it does recap over them. Okay, so don't worry if you miss it right at the beginning, the video will recap over them. And at the end of the video, I'm going to ask you to do a chat, hold, send. Okay, what this is where you type into the chat those 6 levels. You don't send it straight away until everybody's ready, and on the queue, you will all send your answers at the same time. So hopefully I'm turning this quite passive activity of watching a video into quite an active activity, because you're having to watch the video, make your notes on your 6 levels of thinking, and then you're going to have a task at the end as well, and be assessed. Okay, is everybody ready for the video? Can I see some thumbs up, some nods, some waves? Let me know that you're ready. Fantastic. See everybody there. Get some good thumbs up. Brilliant. Okay, so we'll play the video. Remember, you're writing down those 6 levels of thinking, ready for the chat, hold, send activity afterwards. Just if someone could confirm that you can hear the sound, that'd be great. I think it is working. We tested it before.
Bloom's taxonomy is a toolbox that teachers or students can use to classify and organize learning objectives. Its most popular version is based on the cognitive domain and assumes that learning should be structured from easy to difficult in the following 6 steps. 1. Remember. 2. Understand. 3. Apply. 4. Analyze. 5. Evaluate. 6. Create. On the first level, we learn to remember. There is just rote memorization and recollection of facts without much understanding. For example, if we learn about lemons, we want to remember the name, shape, color, size, and that they are sour. Once we memorize these essentially meaningless facts, we move to the second level of learning. On level 2, we learn to understand. We begin to decode information and learn that a lemon is yellow when it's ripe to eat, and if we take a bite, that it's really super sour. We also understand that lemons love sunshine and that they contain lots of vitamin C, which is a great natural antioxidant that keeps us healthy. Now, as we really understand a lemon, we can work with it. On the third level, we apply what we know. We've understood that while lemons are sour, they are also a great provider of vitamin C. To apply this knowledge in a meaningful way, we could boil a lemon into hot water and add some honey. Then serve this hot lemon to our sick sister who's in need of treatment. On the fourth level, we learn to analyze. This involves examining and breaking down information into components, determining how the parts relate to one another, and finding evidence to support generalizations. We study the lemon flesh, examine the skin, and look at levels of vitamins. We conclude that we can eat everything inside, while the skin tastes bitter and contains traces of toxic pesticides. It ought not to be consumed. Now we are ready to evaluate. We analyze, critique, and compare. To evaluate our lemon as a good source of vitamins, we compare it to other sources, such as oranges and supplements. We look at the following properties: vitamin levels, affordability, taste, and packaging waste. If we evaluate our thoughts critically and without bias, we learn where the lemons score high and where others score higher. Now, after we have learned, understood, applied, analyzed, and evaluated, we are ready to create. As we now really understand lemons, also in comparison to similar things, we can formulate a plan to create our own natural lemonade. It's now easy to come up with a cute shop design, a good name, and a good slogan: natural, healthy, yummy. Bloom's taxonomy was first created in 1946 by American psychologist Benjamin Bloom. The revised version from 2001, as just presented, serves as the backbone of many teaching philosophies, in particular those that aim towards teaching specific skills. Each level usually comes with a clear learning objective that can be tested. Critics of the taxonomy often question the existence of a sequential, hierarchical link between each level. What are your thoughts? Please share them in the comments below.
Okay. So we have here two, it's mentioned there, the original from 1946 and the revised. And in the revised, I think they changed the top. So create was at the top of that Bloom's pyramid. And that's the one that we will look at, the revised one, okay, for today. So thank you for your attention on the video. Hopefully you were making your notes of those 6 levels of thinking. So we're going to do our chat, hold, send activity now. So in the chat, you need to type in those 6 levels, but I do not want you to click send until I've had confirmation that everybody's ready to go. So type it in, please. But don't click send until we're ready to go. So we want all 6 in your one message. I can see some people sending their messages soon. Don't send it yet. And then just give a thumbs up when we are ready to click send. I can see a couple of thumbs up coming through. Thank you, Veronica. Who else has got their thumbs up? Pauline, Patricia, Moira, Michael, Maria, Layla. Scrolling, so sorry if I've missed your name and you put your thumb up. Jane, Isabel, Gillian, Athena, fantastic, hello. Okay, so click your send. Everyone should be popping their things in the chat now. You can see them all coming through. And I'll have a little scroll that obviously with 61 people on the call, it's going to be very difficult for me to mark these answers as they come through, but we'll have a little glance. Fantastic. So we've got remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Brilliant. Okay, so little refresher there on Bloom's taxonomy. So here it is in the traditional pyramid that we tend to associate with Bloom's taxonomy. I saw a comment in the chat around understand being measurable. And yes, we do have objectives that have understand. It can be difficult to measure whether somebody's understood something. What is it they're actually doing that shows you that they've understood? So understand can be a little bit vague because it can be difficult to judge whether somebody's understood something. So you can use it. I'm not saying you can't use it. And of course, sometimes we have our objectives given to us from the learning awarding body, for example. But sometimes it can be easier to use explain, identify, describe, that type of thing. Recognize, again, can be difficult, a difficult one to measure. If you have a specific way of measuring that, that might be something that would be really great to share in the afternoon workshops. How do you measure that someone's understood? What are you asking them to do that would be that would show that they've understood? So yes, there's a little bit of debate around some of these things. I find using understand for me in my sessions can be difficult to gauge whether someone's understood unless you're using some questioning and getting them to answer and explain. But then I would just use explain, for example, to make it a bit easier. Okay. So this is a traditional pyramid. We have create at the top, remember at the bottom. And as we go up that pyramid, our levels of thinking become more challenging. That isn't to say that if we're teaching a pre-entry course, we wouldn't use some of those higher level thinking skills, because we absolutely can. An example that was given to me many years ago was that...
Contact your device. Do you want
Sorry,
to call?
let me turn this. Apologies if you heard that. That was my Alexa joining in. So yes, one of the examples that I was given was with maths learners, was that they can still evaluate or analyse even at those very early levels. So for example, they might analyse the difference between a 20p coin and a 50p coin. So although it's still an analysis task. They're having to talk about the differences between the two, and they're analysing those. It's at the appropriate level for them. Okay, so we can still use those higher level learning outcomes, those higher level verbs, to stretch and challenge our learners. Okay, this is another way of looking at Bloom's taxonomy. So I've got a cake instead of a pyramid. I might like cake better. I often like cake. And some people prefer it in more of a table. So you can see some of those verbs and which level of thinking they relate to. Some of these verbs, you know, depending on how hard you make something or how easy you make something, can go in different levels. Yeah, it's not steadfast. You know, sometimes I can see there Isabel saying define seems more of an understand level verb rather than remember. Absolutely, depending on how you use that, it can be more difficult. So this again is just guidelines to support our planning and our objectives. Okay, and this is my favourite one. Okay, it doesn't have create at the top, but I like how colourful it is, and I like how it steps up onto those harder levels. And you have the lower order at the bottom and the higher order further across. There's loads of different visuals of this online that you can find if you want to use that. I tend to find it useful having there when I'm planning, to make sure that I'm using some measurable verbs, but also in my planning, I'm thinking about the type of questions I might ask my learners and whereabouts on the taxonomy those questions might fit. So, you know, am I asking a really high level question where learners have to analyse, and am I going to give them a bit longer to think about that rather than them just identifying or listing something? I might give them a bit less time to think about that, again, depending on their level. Any more thoughts or ideas as we continue our session? Okay. We had some fantastic answers in the chat earlier when we were putting up definitions of words, and you put SMART in the chat. So here's a reminder again of what that means. For our learners, it's really important that we are being specific with what we want them to do. Sometimes learning outcomes or objectives can be quite wordy and quite long, and that makes it quite difficult sometimes for us to measure and for learners to see specifically what they've achieved or what they are intending to achieve. So I find shorter objectives do tend to work better. Okay, Jacob, I can see in the chat you've said people need to know how SMART relates to specific subject areas. Could you elaborate for me? You can unmute if you like.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, it's just that sometimes examples like the one that we saw is a good example, but then sometimes people might think, well, I can't fit that into, you know, what I teach as my subject, because obviously, like, for example, ESOL is my subject, then SMART has very certain specific ideas around teaching English to people. But like someone teaching flower arranging, and SMART subject objectives are going to be very different. I mean, so when you give examples of what SMART means, it's sometimes more helpful to think of it in definite subject areas. That's what I was saying. Okay,
yeah. So I think still in flower arranging, for example, we would still want to have for a session a specific outcome that the learner was going to achieve, that we could measure, that they could articulate that they've made that progress. and we'd still want it to be relevant and time bound. We wouldn't want them not to know kind of those milestones of when they're going to hopefully be able to do something, especially in such a practical task, although it can take practice. So occasionally we move those timeframes, don't we, depending on our learners and depending on their abilities. But yeah, absolutely. It would be great to have some specific examples from across the board that people share. And that's one of the great things about the afternoon sessions. This afternoon in the workshops, you're going to be able to share your objectives with each other in a similar subject area. So hopefully all your ESOL ones will be in a breakout room, and you'll be able to have a look at your objectives and your planning and really get to grips with making sure that it's the best that it can be. We want to make sure that our learners really enjoy our sessions. So it's not just the objectives, it's the activities, which we're going to look at in a little while, and how we assess those as well. Thanks, Jacob. Okay, so this is the process that I use to build objectives, and that in teacher training I've often found that people find useful. So this might help if you're thinking, I need to plan some objectives or outcomes, and I'd like a step-by-step a process. So the first one is to build our STEM sentence. We're going to look at that in just a second. The second is to define your level of thinking. So whereabouts on that Bloom's taxonomy are we aiming for with our learner with this particular task or with this particular outcome? You're going to then choose the verb that matches that level of thinking and the activities or the tasks that you have planned. And combine that into a statement. So we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail. Okay, so this is our STEM sentence. By the end of the session, you will be able to, it could be the session, it could be the lesson, the course, depending on whether you're writing it for a whole course or just for that particular lesson or session that you have with your learners. So which part of SMART does this relate to? Anybody?
Time bound.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, this makes it time bound. This helps our learners to see what they will achieve and when, or hopefully. And again, in our planning, sometimes that can be flexible. Okay, now, sometimes that will be flexible because our learners all learn at different rates, so they might have that spiky profile where it makes it difficult sometimes for some learners, and we might need to scaffold their learning a little bit more if they haven't been able to by the end of the session. What we would like to be able to do is set outcomes that our learners will achieve by the end of the session, with some challenge there. However, sometimes they might struggle. They might need a bit more support. Sometimes we plan things, don't we, and they go down like a lead balloon, and it doesn't quite work the way we want it to. And we think, yes, they're going to get this, and they're going to have a great time doing this activity. And sometimes they might get stuck on something that needs a bit more time. So yes, hopefully by the end of the session they will be able to meet our objectives. If we've been a little bit ambitious, we might have to think about our planning and what we're doing the next week to catch them up, or the next session, and to bring them up to speed. That's why our schemes of learning are working documents, aren't they? We make our plan of what we want to do, but that can go quicker or slower sometimes, and we need to be able to respond to that with our learners. Okay, so I've got some examples here. Moving up that taxonomy, so starting at one of those lower levels, so the remember, can we think of a verb that we might put in this space? these are all English examples because I used to be an English teacher. So sorry for those of you who aren't English teachers on the call, but because English was my subject, I've used some kind of English objectives here. So what could we put in that first one? Fantastic. Identify, give examples of, list some alliterations, identify. Fantastic. You can see some answers coming through in the chat. So I had identify there. You could have recognized, give examples of. Fantastic. So we're being really specific. Obviously, the activity that I would think would go nicely with that would be to give them an advert, maybe on a screen or on a piece of paper, or ask them to find one and see if they can find some alliteration. With students or learners in the past, I've had, you know, bargain bucket from KFC as my example of alliteration used in some advertising. Apologies again if this example is not relevant to the course you teach, but in those sessions this afternoon you'll be able to work through some different examples. Fantastic. Okay, the next one, I've already put the answer up, I'm sorry. I meant to ask you. It will be explain why alliteration is used. Fantastic, I can see Marie put explain. Have a look at the next one then. What might we put there? Thank you, Carol. Carol said demonstrate. Patricia saying demonstrate. Demonstrate, show. Yes, that makes it really, really measurable, because if they're able to demonstrate, the activity might have been that they write a sentence, yeah, and we're using that to measure. Fantastic. What might the next one be then? We're getting a little bit harder now as we go up the taxonomy. Okay, good. I can see some examples coming through of evaluate or analyse. Brilliant. Analyse or evaluate an advert to decide how effective the use of alliteration is. Now, this is a little bit harder as we go up that taxonomy. We're now getting our learners to think about how effective something is, which is harder than just identifying it, for example. And I can see some people are putting create or design your own or produce your own advert using alliteration to persuade your audience. Devise, fantastic. Okay, so this is how we are using Bloom's taxonomy. We're starting with that verb because then it makes it really specific. We can measure that, and I think helps us to think about the types of activities we're going to plan that relate to that outcome. Brilliant. So we've defined our level of thinking in those objectives. Is it one of the lower order thinking skills? Are we moving up to one of those higher order thinking skills? So we've defined that. And we're then choosing a verb that we want to use to match that level of thinking and that we can measure so that will relate to our outcome, our activities. We're thinking about that constructive alignment that we talked about right at the very beginning. We're thinking about making sure that all of these things relate to each other so that our learners have a smooth and enjoyable experience where nothing's too confusing and they know what they're doing to achieve an outcome. So here I've picked demonstrate from that apply level, Bloom's taxonomy. And then you combine that into a statement. This is step 4. This is our making our statement. So demonstrate how to use alliteration. Is this smart at the moment, do we think? Feel free to unmute or pop in the chat. Do we think this is smart or no? Are we nearly there? Are we all the way there? Okay, I can see there no indication as to why it's relevant. Hopefully, it would be clear that it's relevant because for the course, they would need to know what, for example, alliteration is, so they can use it or identify it in an exam, for example. Okay, so it needs to be more measurable. It's not as specific. Fantastic. What form of demonstration? Great. So we've got some real thinking going on here around, okay, we've got demonstrate how to use alliteration, but it's not quite there yet in terms of being more specific. We have our time frame by the end of the session. So here is what would make that more specific, make it more measurable, that explains what they're going to kind of do to achieve that. And then because we've got this as one of our outcomes, we should be planning in our session an activity that supports them to be able to do this. Yeah. So if we're asking them to demonstrate how to use alliteration by writing their own sentence that includes alliteration, then we would hope that they would have opportunity to do that in the session so that we can see that they've done it. We would be assessing that. There's lots of different ways we could assess that, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. It might be that we kind of observe them doing that and we can see that they've used alliteration. They could be peer assessing each other. There's lots of different ways to have a look at that. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to use the chat box now. I'd like you to think about your own specific courses that you teach, or course that you teach, and be having a look at an outcome or objective that you have, or one that you were thinking of using. And I want you to analyse it. Think of it. Does it have Bloom's taxonomy verb? Is it measurable? Is it realistic, achievable, etc.? And just pop one of your objectives in the chat. Have a think about it. You can construct your own now that we've been over this. So I'll give a few minutes to have a look and to think about what we might want to use in our own. And if you could pop an example in the chat, that'd be great, because I think it'd be really beneficial, because we've got so many different subject areas on our Zoom this morning, to see the different types of objectives that people have and how they construct those. Brilliant. Describe at least 3 childhood illnesses. I think in my household, we've probably had all of them. And certainly now they've gone back to school, I'm sure we'll all be catching everything again up until Christmas, which is great. Great, thank you, Richard. You've got 2 Bloom's verbs in yours, demonstrate and create. You might just want to pick one of those. Sometimes if we have 2, are they doing a demonstration or are they creating something? You might want to split it up. So demonstrate how to create, demonstrate how to do one of the steps on there, and then another objective would be to create those displays. So you might split that up. And they're 2 very different levels of thinking. But yes, fab, very nearly there. Okay, I can see some quite long objectives coming through with quite a lot that you'd have to measure. So one of them is identify types of text using letters, emails, a recipe, a note, and an advert, etc. by using key layout methods, persuasive, instructive, descriptive. It's quite a lot, so we might split those up into identify the types of texts used, and then explain or demonstrate the layout methods. So, you know, just off the top of my head, might split that up a little bit, because it's going to be difficult to measure such a big objective. But good, I can see there we've got Bloom, we're making it smart. Fantastic. Oh, I like this one. By the end of the session, you will use an adjective to describe how you are feeling. See lots of English examples coming through. Thanks, Michael. This is interesting. I think I'm in the literature and history session this afternoon, so we'll be able to share more of these objectives. It's great, thank you. Apologies if I'm not able to read every single one. I'm trying my best, but if so many come through, it's very difficult. Oh, we've got some CPR and recovery position. That's fantastic, I like that one. It's amazing to see the range of courses we're teaching here at the WEA and in the Northwest, the type of things that our learners can enrol on. Brilliant. So I'm just going through. So of course, this activity that I've given is great because you're able to demonstrate, you're able to create your own objective. I'm using this, of course, to assess. So you're popping it in the chat and I'm looking on here and I'm thinking, this is great. What we've just been over, I'm seeing that people are applying that in their objectives. So it's really, really great way to do that. If you're online, especially if you're doing online teaching, using the chat like this is a really useful tool. Got some customer service skills here being used. Fantastic. Safeguarding questions. Fantastic. Lovely. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing their objectives. Hopefully we can see in those that we've got those building blocks in place. So we can see we've got them being specific, measurable. We're using Bloom's taxonomy. We're starting our objective with that verb to make it really measurable and clear. Amazing job. Thank you, everybody. So part one, our smart learning objectives. What did we have for our objectives for this? We had define the term learning objective or outcome. We had explain the benefits of using smart objectives. We had evaluate learning objectives using Bloom's taxonomy verbs and construct a learning objective to use in your planning. So what activities have we completed in this session so far to enable us to show that we've met these outcomes? What did we do to define the term learning objective? Anyone remember the activity?
So it was research and then share via your chat. So integrated via the chat.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, so we had that starter activity. You looked up, you did some research. What were the wider skills that as learners, if I was to set this task, that they would have been developing? Feel free to unmute, let me know. Maria says digital in the chat. Yes, IT. Fantastic. Yeah, so research, study skills, IT, digital skills, using the internet, all of those are the wider skills that our learners would have developed by doing an activity such as that. So although it's a brief activity, it's a 5-minute starter activity, we're developing a wide range of skills of our learners in order to support them to define the term learning objective. Some independent thinking, yes, some critical thinking as well, because some of the definitions said the same thing, some said slightly different things. Fantastic. Explain the benefits of using smart learning objectives. hopefully we can see those benefits of being able to measure our progress really clearly with our learners and helping them to articulate the progress that they've made. Doing an activity like this at the end of the session where you recap over those learning outcomes, tick them off, can be good. Sometimes you can do that partway through the session as well. Yes, Louise, I appreciate it can be difficult on a session with 63 people to get everyone to speak together. There is a breakout room in the next session, so we will be able to do a little bit more teamwork. Fantastic. So we've evaluated some learning objectives. We had a look at those, and you've been able to construct a learning outcome in your own planning. So that's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to have a short break before the next session. How long do we think we might need? Should we come back in 10 minutes, have a 10-minute break, grab a cup of tea, rest your eyes? It's been an hour or so. Okay, so we'll come back at 22 at 10:40. If you stay on the call, please, and just turn your camera off, it saves us having to readmit everyone. So just stay on, but you can just turn your camera off. We'll come back in 9 minutes now. Thank you. See you soon.
Cara.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm Step into Care.
Hi, Veronica. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you and to meet you. Yeah, it would be great sometime if you had a look at the course with us. Because I have a phenomenal amount, literally a phenomenal amount of outcomes from Skills for Care across 13 standards, 43 tasks.
Wow.
5 learning outcomes I had to reduce it to that hopefully I made sense that I'm looking at with the new tutor.
Okay.
So
yeah, we can plan some time and have a look at that and see
that
how
would be lovely because fresh eyes are fantastic.
Brilliant. No, yeah, absolutely. Get in touch and we can book something in soon.
Super. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to part 2 now. And some of this session is going to be handed over to you guys. There's going to be some breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask David to set those up for me as well when we get to that part. Probably, because we've got so many people, maybe 3 or 4 people in a breakout room would be good. If you could, when we're ready. Thanks, David. Okay, so we have our second session, using learning outcomes or objectives to check progress. Let's have a look at our outcomes then. Have a read of these. Thank you, Jacob, for sharing a book here in the chat. It's great if anyone's got anything that they've read, any interesting books, articles. So fantastic to share as well. I'm hoping to be able to set up for our Northwest region a community of practice where we can share CPD and articles and interesting things around teaching and learning. And that's something to keep an eye on. We'll be able to use. Okay, any questions or thoughts about these objectives? Anything anyone would like to add or comment on? Okay, let's make a start then. So, just as a refresher, we have different types of assessment strategies, formative and summative assessment. Have a read of that. You might want to make some notes. Some of you, this will be very familiar, and maybe for some, you might want a refresher. Fantastic, Veronica. If you're doing some research, it'd be great to share some of your findings. I love that. There's lots of different people at the moment thinking and talking about metacognition, the benefits, the drawbacks. So it'd be great to see what you've got in your research. Okay, so formative assessment is all of those types of small, low stakes assessment opportunities that we give our learners in the course of a session, over the course of a number of weeks. It's to help us to see how much progress they're making, whether they are achieving those outcomes, whether they're on track for their summative assessment at the end of our course. Some courses don't have specific summative assessment like an exam or a practical or whatever it might be, but all courses should still make sure that they're assessing learners and checking that they are retaining the new information, the knowledge and skills, and that they're developing. So assessment for learning is our formative assessment, because when we're teaching, I've done quite a lot of formative assessment in these sessions. I'm asking questions. It's quite difficult for me to, on a first session with so many people, ask lots of targeted questions. I don't know everybody yet, and that will come. But you're popping things in the chat. I'm using that to assess how well have we grasped a particular thing. Can we move on? Do I need to explain something in a slightly different way? And you can adjust your instruction. You can then go, oh, okay, lots of people haven't quite understood this the way I intended, so I might need to spend a bit more time. Equally, if I don't have time in the session, like for today's session, for example, there's not a lot of wiggle room. I might think, okay, I'm going to have a look at that and book some time, maybe do smaller group CPD or some coaching to support. Equally, I might be identifying that we've got some amazing things going on and we want to share that best practice. Okay, so that's fantastic. Summative assessment at the end of learning usually can be a topic, a module, can be at the end of the course. It's often high stakes. When we think of summative assessments, we think of the A-level exams that my eldest stepson did recently. He's going to uni this weekend. Yay! Really excited. Not that I'm trying to get rid of him. I love him to pieces. He's only going down the road. But yes, very, very excited, and he worked hard. But it is high stakes. There was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. And we try and avoid that, don't we, by supporting our learners with their study skills, especially if they are going to be doing a formal assessment for a qualification at the end, such as your functional skills or whatever it might be, community interpreting, etc. We want to support them with that wide range of skills to make sure that this is as easy as it can be. So although it's high stakes, we're giving them the best opportunity for success. And normally with that summative assessment, you don't have time to adjust your instruction. For example, my stepson finished his A-levels. By that point, it's too late. You can't go back and reteach something unless he was going to resit, and we don't want that, really, do we? Okay. Oh, my arrow's not working. Let's try again. And then we have a slide here to remind us about the difference between passive and active learning. Oh, I've just seen some questions in the chat. So where would you place the diagnostic assessment? So I would have that at the beginning. Now you're going to use your diagnostic. So that could be, depending on the course, it could be right at the beginning of the course. You might do it then. You might also have other diagnostic assessments at the beginning of each module or topic. So smaller diagnostics that support you to be able to identify starting points to build from. Brilliant, I can see some answers. I'm going to put it in the chat. Okay, so passive versus active learning. We had a bit of an example before in the earlier session of moving from quite a passive activity and making it more active. Can anyone remember what we did in the session a little while ago? Feel free to unmute and let me know.
You had us making notes instead of just watching a video.
Brilliant, yeah. So the video task that we had, it could be quite passive if I just played that video, but I set up an activity, you know, note taking, and told you how I was going to assess it at the end. So with the chat hold send. So we've moved something that could be traditionally quite passive. Watch this video. Okay, great, watched it, done, got it, let's move on. And we've moved it to be a little bit more active. Active learning engages learners.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Maybe more of visual learning.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Active, maybe more of visual learning.
Good, yeah. So you can. There could be times where they're watching a video or something like that, which you want to take to be more active. I can see here lots of answers coming through in the chat as well. Watching a video is a task to do. Engagement and participation on the chat. It's great when you're doing an online session to be able to use the chat. Discussions, setting up group tasks. Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a little visual here with our arrow. And we have some different types of activities here on this arrow, this continuum. Have a read of those. So these ones, traditionally more passive. And these ones, more active for our learners. Our learners are more involved, more hands-on. Now, of course, if you have some entry-level learners, they might not feel confident in teaching each other things yet. So we're going to choose activities that are appropriate for our learners, but equally that challenge them. You know, we might have someone in our group that is a little bit stronger and who is able to teach or explain something to someone else in a group. So make use of your learners too. Okay. Any ideas how we might make a reading task, which could be quite passive, into something a bit more active? Feel free to unmute.
Read it out loud. Make it more interactive that way.
Yeah, you could ask people to read certain sections. Good. Any other ideas?
You could set questions, maybe like 1 or 2 questions before I read, and kind of get them to be thinking about answering those questions as they're reading through the text, maybe making a note of the answers.
Fantastic. Love that. Yes. So what are we looking out for in this piece of text that we're reading? Why are we reading it? What are we analysing, or what are we picking out? We might have Layla's put in there to highlight words, underline. It might be that they're reading a text because you want them to pick out the adjectives, for example. Or it could be that they're reading a text to analyse the effectiveness of something. Yeah. Fantastic. We've got set questions, think, compare, share, great activity. Oh, Jane, love this one. Ask them to paraphrase a paragraph. Great. So they write it in their own words. They read it, they digest it up here, and they have to then put it in their own words, summarise. Yeah, so many different things you can do to make just a reading activity much more active and engaging. Could have a quiz afterwards. Yeah, I'm going to test you on these 3 things, so make sure you look out for them. Scan for words. Yes, you might do it more of a skim and scan activity. Lovely. Fantastic. You're going to have some opportunity to share some of these ideas in our breakout rooms in a moment. Okay, in the chat, I'd like you to list as many ways that you can think of that we assess learners. So, for example, a quiz we might use to assess learners. How else do we assess learners? And this can be formative or summative, but what other strategies do we use to assess? Written tasks, gap fill matching cards, like card sort activities. Brilliant. So many coming through. This is fantastic. Scroll back up. Question and answers, quizzes, flipped learning. Love a bit of flipped learning. Yes. Helen, could you explain flipped learning to our group, please?
Yeah, it's where you might give a task to a student or a group of students to explain to the class. So if you know you've got a student who's quite capable of a certain concept or idea, then you get them to explain it in their own words to the class or to a group of students. Yeah.
Fab. And that can often come before a session. You've set it up and you've asked them to do something before they come. And so you flipped that learning to be outside of the classroom. And you might say, next week, Tim, I would like you to give a demonstration on something, or to talk us through this particular thing. So you're going to have to go away and plan something ready for next week.
Yeah, we used to do it as, on my teacher training a while back, but we used to do it as maybe like, say, half of the session, you would be given you'd be set what you were looking at, your objective or whatever. And basically half the lesson, you would, as group, go away, research as much as possible about that, try and bring that together, collate it in some kind of summary, then deliver that to everybody else. And then we'd usually have the last section of the class where the teacher is then kind of recapping what we've done, but also making sure that we've identified the foundations, the fundamental points, made sure that we've prioritized the correct things, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fantastic way. I used to do this with my teacher trainees when I was teaching on the PGCE a while ago, and I did it with A-level students, but I also did it with lower level learners as well, where I would ask them in groups to research something, present back, or I'd ask them to plan an activity for the group to do next week, or plan a quiz to do to recap the learning that we've done this week, and they were going to do that as the starter activity next week, for example. So there's loads of different ways to do that, and as a teacher then you're using that to assess how much they've learned, how much they've understood, because if they're missing key points from their summary, then we can use that opportunity to fill that gap. But also we're identifying, okay, they've missed this, they need some support. And equally, they might come up with some amazing stuff. They've stretched and challenged, they've really come up with some great ideas or thoughts. And we're thinking, okay, I can challenge these guys a bit more next week because they've come up with this. So yeah, really, really great way to do things. Love flipped learning and the different applications. Fantastic. Yeah, observation, discussion, verbal questioning. You can see role plays. Yes. Case studies, evaluations, peer assessment, self-assessment, role play, poster creation, mini test quizzes. So many ideas in the chat. This is fantastic. Progress tests. I can't possibly read all these out because there's so many of them, but it's fantastic, and you're going to use some of those in a little bit. So here were some of my ideas on here. It's not an exhaustive list, as you will see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we come up with even more in our chat. So that's fantastic. Okay, so all of this again relates to what we started out with earlier this morning, which was our constructive alignment. We looked at learning outcomes first of all. Sorry, I'm pointing at a screen that you can't see. I have two screens. I'm pointing at it. I don't know if it's somewhere above or below me. Don't know. On your screen. So we have our learning outcomes that we looked at this morning. And now we're looking at kind of activities and assessment, aren't we? We're thinking about how are we measuring against those objectives, and what type of activities are we putting in place? Brilliant. So you're going to go into breakout rooms. I have a link that I need to give you. Let me just see if that's on here. Bear with me 1 second. I shall give you the link in a second. And this is it's on the Tutor Training Hub, and there's a handout on there, and I've got a link for you to access that. I'll give you a glimpse of what it looks like. In your breakout rooms, you're going to complete this task. You're going to have a look at your planning. Okay, you're going to be thinking about your planning in your groups. You're going to share some ideas of the assessment strategies that you use. So what are you using to assess your learners? It can be low stakes assessment, you know. You're going to be thinking about if they're appropriate for the course or level. And do they link to your outcomes or objectives to measure progress? And is there a lot of variety in there to engage our learners? Sometimes we get into the habit of using similar things that feel familiar, and that can be useful for learners because it's easy to predict, but it also, we want to make sure that we're developing that wide range of skills, don't we? And supporting our learners with different ways that they're going to be assessed. And I've created a visual organizer for you, which you can use if you would like in your groups. So I'm going to get the link for that and pop it in the chat. It is on the Tutor Training Hub. So if you go in there for the ADD day, you should be able to find it, but I will give you a link. So this is what it looks like, although the handout that I've made actually has some stretch and challenge on it. So it's got 2 more columns, which you could have a look at filling in as well. So in the first column, you've got your verb from Bloom's taxonomy. And you can see it starts off on those lower order thinking skills and moves up to our higher order thinking skills. And what I'd like you to do is have a look at your planning. And if you don't have your planning in front of you, that's okay. You can be thinking about these types of things. I'm sure you know what you've got coming up. Have a think about the active learning ideas, the activities and tasks you have planned for your learners to make the learning engaging and active, and how that relates to the verb that you've chosen for your objective. And then in the following column, you have the assessment method. So how are you going to assess that? So if it's a discussion, for example, how are you assessing that discussion? There's lots of different ways to do that. I'm sure you'll come up with some brilliant ways. There might be checklists that you're giving to learners, or a reflection that they have to write at the end or something. So how will we measure it? On the handout that has the stretch and challenge columns, there is a column around the wider skills that learners will develop. So communication, teamwork, study skills, research, anything like that you can think of, because we need to be thinking about those to make sure our learners are developing that wide range of skills. And also there's a column on there for how we might evidence this. Okay, so specifically thinking about, okay, they've done this and they've achieved the outcome and I've assessed it, but how am I evidencing that? What can I show or what can I do to show that learners have made that progress? So yes, I will go and have a look for the handout now while Dave is just setting up those things. Bear with me 1 second and I'll get that. I'll pop it into the chat so you can open it. Now in your groups, it's up to you how you structure this. So you could have one person sharing their screen, filling in the handout. You could each do it individually for your own course. I'll let you decide and have some autonomy on that, on how you want to do that. And I'm just going to get this link. You got any questions before we go into the breakout rooms? I have shared the link in the chat now. Please go and open it and just check that it opens and works and that you've got that handout. You should be able to get it and download it.
Everyone? Is that link for everyone, Cara?
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
It should work. Helen is saying it's no fear. I'll try, and anyone who, so Lisa. So some people have it, some people don't. That's strange.
I don't have it, yeah.
David,
is to fill in the table in our group, and then what are we going to do? Are we going to feed back or put it into a discussion?
Yeah, so because there's going to be quite a lot of groups, and we have limited time, I'm not going to be able to hear from everybody everything that they've put in there. But what I'll do is ask for a couple of people to share what they've found and to pop some things in the chat when we come back.
Okay.
What's going to be useful is once you've filled those in, I will ask you to email those to me later, and then I might be able to share those somewhere, maybe in a community of practice that we set up for you. David, is there any way to email this handout out if we download it to everybody on the call?
Yeah, I think the access denied is likely to be that some people are not on the tutor training hub, so I can go through and do that in a minute, as you know, whilst people are in the rooms. So long as someone in the room has got it,
yes,
then we're okay right now, and I'll work through the list and sort those out while they're in there. Thank
you, David. That's really handy. I'm so glad you're here with me. Okay, so I shall open the rooms now. Have a go. If you need help, let me know. I think there's like a little help button where you can ask me to join you. I'll give you until 35 minutes past. Okay, so you've got enough time to have a look at this, fill it in, have a chat, get to know each other as well, and share some ideas. Any questions before we go?
You might get 3 people, one acting as an observer, one as a counsellor, and one as a person being counselled. I can't remember what they call it. It might be goldfish bowl or something. So they have the chat where they apply the principles of counselling in this sort of group setting. And then the observer will comment on how the principles or the theories that were applied in practice. And then they move around and they swap round with each other, so they all get an opportunity to do that. So that's that kind of thing. I see an awful lot of courses on Canvas where people just rewrite the learning outcomes they explain in a paragraph. You know, how a rainbow is formed, or whatever it is, how to fry an ice cube. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't bring in that extra activity, and I think that is so important. So if you're seeing things like creating a presentation, filling in a table, depending on the level, sometimes it's valid to say write a paragraph on whatever the subject is.
But
we
sometimes
see
not.
too much of it. One of the other things that a lady in our group, she does a lot of ESOL work, so she does things like missing words in sentences or putting things in the right order. You know, baking a cake, getting the ingredients correct. But the wider skills there will be things like broadening the vocabulary, learning from each other, because you do actually, particularly in group work, you do learn. Each student learns from each other.
Yeah,
they didn't know when they came in. You know, so
that's fantastic.
So ours was more kind of a general discussion because we had a problem with the form.
Okay, no, that sounds fantastic, and it's great that you've been able to think about those wider skills. One of the things that's really, really interesting to do with learners as well is when you put them in that group and they're assigning roles, you could ask them to assign the roles themselves. And one of the things then that we're supporting them with is that understanding, if we highlight it, of British values and democracy and, you know, respect and tolerance for each other and all those other things that we signpost to in our sessions. But by asking them to assign roles themselves, you're bringing in not just those wider skills of teamwork and communication, but you're able to highlight those British values that are being embedded or used in the session too. Lovely, thank you, Carol. So it sounds like you've had a really productive discussion about different ways to do things. Steve, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, we I wrote down while everybody else gave me the information, which is excellent. And this was around summarising. So what was said in the chat was, in the room, was around perhaps you could have a video and recount what had been seen, or also you could have an article and cut up the paragraphs, and each person took a paragraph and summarised the main points in that, leading into discussing how that process was summarised and getting the peer assessment in that. And as far as stretching goes, I thought it was really, really interesting actually that look at the evidence that was used to make the arguments in the paragraph, and then recounting or summarising that evidence or paraphrasing that evidence. It was a really good group, and I was really pleased to be in it because I didn't know very much about it and everybody else did.
Well, that's fabulous. I'm glad that it was really useful for you. And it sounds like you had really productive discussions around different ways of doing a reading activity, for example, you know, cutting it up, like you say, giving people the opportunity to summarise, which is a skill in itself, and present those main points back, and those wider skills that are being developed during the activity. So yes, and we can evidence that with notes that learners are making, with feedback that they're given. It could be written feedback, it could be peer or self-reflection. They might reflect on their own performance. So fantastic, lovely. I've got time, I think, a couple of minutes if we've got one more volunteer from another group. If you've got a different verb that you looked at that you might want to mention, have we got one more volunteer? Come on. There must be one more. And what I can't do now, because you're out of the breakout room, is see who was with each other. So I don't want to pick on someone whose group's
Cara,
already gone.
we did explain, we did identify, demonstrate, and analyse. Have I missed? Is there any of those that are useful?
Oh, Maria, it'd be lovely if you could maybe do your analyse or demonstrate.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
we've had a little bit, but let's go.
Yeah, so we didn't have any English in our group. We had 3 maths and one lovely lady, Rebecca, who does like digital skills. So we had a bit of a, so we actually we kind of, yeah, it was a bit tricky actually. It was a good activity. So we active learning ideas. So Dennis actually picked an English one for this one. So analyze. So the activity was to sort of decide between fiction and non-fiction books. So they were given snapshots at the beginning, a bit of a mini plenary, just tiny little snippets to decide where they fitted and make their decisions accordingly. But then they had to have a look at those books in more detail and actually analyse whether or not they were fiction and non-fiction and why, and also what had made them think otherwise from the first snapshots that they'd been given.
Brilliant.
And then that went on to each learner actually giving a brief summary of what and why.
Mm-hmm.
And then relating that to the initial starter. So kind of like your end plenary, they then go back to the original thing that they started with and move them around it accordingly into the right categories.
Mm.
And that would be sort of done by then taking snapshots, using what they'd actually done within the activity as their evidence. Not really, like a summative kind of assessment, but an active assessment.
Yeah.
And a stretch and challenge for that group, Dennis said, would be maybe to create their own snapshots or pieces of fiction or non-fiction for the other learners to then categorise.
Yeah, great. So what's really interesting, isn't it, is that they're really having to analyse that use of language in those extracts to see is this fiction or non-fiction, because sometimes it's very difficult to tell. Yeah, so love that idea. And then it's almost a whole lesson there that you've described of kind of what you would do next and how you would recap on things. So fantastic, wonderful. Thanks, Maria, for sharing. And yeah, developing a wide range of skills, teamwork, collaboration, critical thinking, all of those wonderful things. Brilliant. Okay, I hope you really took a lot from that activity. It would be great if we had kind of all morning or all afternoon on this. It might be something that you come back to in your afternoon session this afternoon, where you're looking at your planning and thinking, okay, we've gone over some of these things. What could we use from some of the ideas that we've shared? So Self and peer assessment. Have a read of these points. These are just some benefits of using self and peer assessment in your sessions and building that in.
Cara?
Yes.
It's Layla. Please, could you let Karen back in? She needs to get back in. She's.
Let me have a look.
Sorry, it's my fault. I've just let her join.
Oh, thanks, David. Sorry, I didn't see that someone in the waiting room. Thank you. Okay, so some benefits of self and peer assessment on those slides. Thinking about supporting our learners with becoming more autonomous, for taking responsibility for their learning, for shaping their own understanding of the progress that they're making as well, and supporting each other in class, giving good feedback, communicating clearly. There's so many benefits of using some self and peer assessment, and it also takes that burden of responsibility away from us a little bit. Of course, we're still going to give feedback, we're still going to assess, we're still going to do that, but if we're using some elements of self and peer assessment, we're supporting our learners with making good progress and learning new skills. Okay, let's have a look at our learning outcomes and see where we're at. So we started off with explaining the difference between formative and summative assessment. You were able in the chat, there was a race in the chat to list as many assessment strategies as you could think of. Okay, and that last task has covered these two objectives here. So hopefully you can see that the activities that we've done in this session supported you to be able to say that you've achieved those outcomes. Brilliant. Okay, we have 35 minutes before we go on lunch in order to finish our part 3. So let's see. Do we want 5 minutes now, or do we think we can push through to the end? Do we need a little break? If anyone needs just to nip off for a comfort break, feel free for a couple of minutes. But let's see if we can push through to the end. I want to make sure you've got an hour for your lunch, so you're not, you can have a break from the screen. So have a read of your objectives for this session. So some of these questions are quite difficult when we reflect on our practice and think, how do I actually know that learners have remembered their feedback? Or, how do learners know they've improved? What things do we have in place to support us and support our learners to know that they've improved? And yes, as Karen said in the chat there, these are very indicative of the types of questions Ofsted will ask either you or your learners in a session. And that doesn't matter whether it's accredited or non-accredited. These types of questions are to do with teaching, learning and assessment. And if you're a subscriber to evidence-based practice, you will know that feedback is up there on really high on the list of really effective strategies that support learners to make good progress and achieve their outcomes. So feedback is something that is important. We need to focus on for the benefit of our learners, because we want our learners to make progress. We want them to know what they're doing well and what they need to improve. And we want them to be acting on that feedback. Oftentimes it can feel like we might give some really amazing written feedback, but if there isn't the opportunity for our learners to work on that and develop that, and we just move on, that can be a lost opportunity for learners to really develop off the back of that great feedback that we're giving. Equally, if our feedback is only ever, well done, this is brilliant, and we miss opportunities to support them with spelling, punctuation and grammar, or moving up to higher levels, maybe the structure of their paragraphs and things like that, we're not giving the learners the most that we can give them in order to support them to achieve and reach their potential. So some useful questions to reflect on.
Do you want us to write these answers down, or can we speak about them?
No, it's more of a self-reflection. So just for yourself, really, to be thinking about, and hopefully some of the slides moving forward will help with some ideas about how we address some of these things. Self-reflection will be quite personal sometimes. So sometimes I don't want people to always share if they're not comfortable with that. Okay. So feedback. It provides students with knowledge of the things they've done well and things they need to improve on at that basic level. We want it to be developmental feedback, and learners really benefit from that, don't they? If you're telling them in a developmental way to improve, this is what we need to do. And if we're very specific about that, maybe linking it to assessment criteria or outcomes, that's really beneficial to them. Have a read of that last one. So for our accredited courses, this is really vitally important. But still, for our non-accredited courses, we need to be thinking about what does success mean on this course? What are the outcomes that we're hoping our learners will achieve? And have we given some feedback on that? Are they able to remember what I did in week 2? Now it's week 7 of this 10-week course. Have they had feedback, and are they supported to remember? And so sometimes we might think of that in terms of a spiral curriculum where we recap over earlier concepts and maybe go into more depth. But is our feedback supporting learners to be able to recall, to use the information that they're given, and to develop? So different types of feedback. Can anyone think of some different types of feedback? Pop them in the chat if you can. We've already spoken about a number of them today. Thank you, Jane. We've got verbal and written, some sort of tutorial feedback. So you might do a tutorial which is focused on feedback. Peer, gestures. Good. Written evaluation, peer feedback. You can see some great answers coming through in the chat. Brilliant. Oh yes, Helen, I used to do the same QR codes, especially with my A-level learners, where there'd be lots of feedback on an essay, for example. They'd scan their QR code and listen to me just talking them through their assignment and things. So it could be really, really useful. Sometimes I'd also get them to listen to that and then to summarise in their own words what my feedback said and what they're going to do as a result. That can be a useful way to do that as well. So yes, what we can do, Gillian, is we can any feedback or any support that people want, I can take, and I can look at doing some sessions on how to use some of these things. So using QR codes and recording verbal feedback and things like that. So yes, we can put on some sessions for that too. Brilliant. So we've got loads of different feedback against targets that you've been given, or a learner's been given. Feedback in the ILR, that type of thing. The ILP. Okay. So in terms of best practice, this is what we're looking at. Okay. Have a read. Okay, so certainly when we have visitors in to come and check on the quality of teaching, learning and assessment, they will want to make sure that feedback is timely, which means it's regular. What isn't considered best practice is to leave all of that kind of feedback until the end of a course. If we do that, learners haven't had the opportunity to make improvements or to learn from that feedback in order to apply it for future submissions or assignments. So we want regular, timely opportunities for feedback that support a learner throughout a course to make improvements. And Ofsted will check that. That also helps with things like IQAing or the checking on RAPA progress, because if the feedback is timely and regular, it gives that opportunity to dip in and out rather than it being a huge job for our IQAs at the end, where they have to go and do all of that. They can break that up into smaller, more manageable pieces. So yeah, we want learners to use the feedback. If they're given feedback but then do nothing with it, it's almost a wasted opportunity. So have we checked that learners are using that feedback, are developing, are making progress? So feedback is part of that assessment and feedback cycle. So we start off by assessing that piece of work or that task. It can be low stakes or more higher stakes. Sometimes it might be a submission of an assignment or something, or it might be something a lot more low stakes, such as a quiz or, you know, all the other things that we've talked about. We're going to give feedback. Might be us giving feedback, might be peer feedback, it might be self-reflection and the learners using an example of an exemplar and marking themselves against that, and seeing how well they do. So they might be giving themselves some feedback too. We want to link to those outcomes and criteria, and don't forget SPAG. I've seen many an Ofsted report where it talks about learners not being supported to develop their spelling, punctuation and grammar, and that's in any subject, any and every subject that's being taught and delivered. Doesn't matter if it's not English. We need to be showing that we're supporting our learners to improve their skills in that area. We want some developmental comments. We would then ask questions. We might ask questions of our learners and give them the opportunity to ask questions about their feedback. And give the learners time then to reflect and make that improvement. And absolutely, Isabel, yes, it's important to build specific suggestions into feedback. So yeah, if you're telling a learner to do, you're saying that something needs improved, maybe suggest a resource that will help them, or I've seen that where people have given a link to a website with more information for a particular thing, you know, or if they are making continuous mistakes with apostrophes, for example, you might signpost a resource that will support them, that they can go and do to try and improve. Yeah, that time to reflect and make improvements is important, and give feedback on those improvements as well. So this is what we call closing that loop. So we open that feedback loop, and in order to close that feedback loop, what we want to do is check that those improvements have been made, and that the learner is making improvements. Now that could be on that one piece of work, or it could be over a period of time where they've been given a target and we're checking that target has been met or has been actioned in some way. Fantastic. Any thoughts on this?
I've just put a thought in the chat room, and it's a critical thought. So it's really difficult in Canvas, and I am going to try and work on the recording, but it's really difficult in Canvas to give really rich feedback. When the learners receive it as that email, it's like a stream of consciousness. It all lumps it all together. And I would just switch off.
Yeah. So
personally, so
if they go into...
and I was also told by the IQA my feedback was too long. So I'm trying to cover everything.
Yeah. Is Is the feedback when they go on to Canvas and they access their piece of work, is it then kind of
they first get it as an email?
Right.
Yeah, you need to, you guys, to do looking at this, you need to look at what the learner is experiencing.
Of course. So that's
feedback on Canvas to see what I mean. Very early doors, we were saying, is there any way of changing the colours? So we're writing in different areas, you know, as we would do, using different highlighters for SPAG in the older days. And
that's something to look at.
Tara, could I just come in just quickly? We are running some workshops, Veronica, which we're going to be giving you the details of at the end of these sessions. There are some few simple things that you can do which deal with all of those things that you're saying. So
cool, because that's been really bothering me. And
so we're going to pick all those up over the next 2 weeks. There are going to be a lot of workshops put on that people will be able to drop in and come to, and be recording them as well.
Will there be evening sessions, David?
Yes,
I'll be
there
teaching.
are.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, David. We do have some Canvas support, and any way that we can make this better for our learners is something that we want to explore. So absolutely. Any way we can make our feedback accessible is something we should be looking at. Thanks, Gillian, as well. Yeah, we'll look at different ways to do that. Great stuff. Okay, so we're thinking about closing that loop. So what might this look like when we've got the heading there? Why is that? I can't see that. There we go. So what learners have done well and what they need to improve. There's lots of different methods for that. You could use RAG ratings. You could give them a strengths and areas for development. On as a written summary, you might write what went well and even better if. That's the WWW and EBI at the top. There's loads and loads of different ways to give that feedback on what they've done well and what they need to improve. We obviously want to build their confidence, so we want to be telling them what they've done well, but we also need that developmental feedback of what they could do to improve. And even if a learner is getting really, really high marks or high grades, we want to stretch and challenge them. So we must be giving feedback on what they can do to improve, even if we're thinking, oh, they've met this, they've done this. What else could they do to take it even further? To be thinking about, could they read a particular article that would enhance their knowledge further, or could they learn how to do referencing if they haven't included any referencing and it's not really required as part of the course? Actually, I'm going to challenge you next time, reference your sources. So even if they're doing amazingly, we want to challenge them to do something further. Yes, Claire, thank you. I can see you're putting directed improvement and reflection time. DIRT is mentioned on here, peer assessment. So DIRT time, I've seen it used in colleges, I've seen it used in universities, I've seen it used in community education, all different types of settings in schools, as a way for learners to have specific time where they look at their feedback and they reflect on it and they make improvements in sessions, which gives the opportunity to do that. And it can be difficult if you've got a large course in a quite a short amount of time, but you start to reap the rewards of that later on when they do more submissions, and actually they are they're being able to implement some of those strategies that they've used to improve later on. It can be really beneficial. Thank you, Jacob, for sharing Teacher Toolkit. It's really, really useful. And again, I'm setting up this community of practice to share different articles and ideas and teaching strategies and things. So look out for that. Yes, and success against criteria. You might use a demonstration. You might have an exemplar answer, sample answer. You might get them to pick it apart. I used to get my learners to, they'd have two, and they'd have to, you know, in pairs or groups, mark each one, decide where it sat on the mark scheme and how it met those criteria. So they'd be marking off where LO1 was achieved and where LO2 was achieved in that one, and then comparing it to the next one and deciding what grade they would give it, and then using their own and comparing it to those exemplars as well, or those examples. So there's loads of different ways you can do it. WWW is what went well, and the EBI is even better if. It's just another way of presenting strengths and areas for development. So yes, mark schemes, exemplars, criteria, really important to share. I did some intensive functional skills level 2 English courses a while ago, and that was 3 days to try and get these learners through their functional skills, and quite a lot of that time was spent looking at sample answers and comparing their own answers to that, and what would they need to add to their own in order to get to that standard. Okay, so you can look lots of different ways of using feedback with our learners. Apologies again, I'm pointing at the screen that you can't see, but it's on your slides. So what do learners do with feedback? Hopefully they reflect. They refine, they make improvements. They use the positives for motivation. You know, we want to keep them on side and keep them motivated, and they might then apply those skills in their future work. And it's not just about their future work with us on our course, but we're thinking longer term. You know, what skills are they developing that they can take into the workplace or onto another course, or, you know, if they're progressing up those levels, we're equipping them really well. We've gone over this already. Sorry for the duplication of the slide. Okay, so we're going to have a quick activity. We have about 10 minutes left. So just individually, this activity, because we are pressed for time, I'd like you to have a look at the types of feedback that we've considered in this part of the session, and think about the variety of strategies that you're using in your session. Is it always verbal feedback? Are you predominantly giving written feedback? Are you not really utilising peer feedback, or even that own self-reflection of learners to give themselves feedback? I also want you to think about how learners can record verbal feedback that you give them, and when you are going to check that learners have acted on that feedback. Let's give you a couple of minutes to reflect on this, and to plan some ideas. So there might be a particular lesson that you've got coming up, and you think, okay, how am I going to give feedback to my learners, or what are we going to do? So I'll just give you a few minutes. If you have any questions, let me know. Or any thoughts that you want to share. So have we got any ideas of how we can support our learners to remember or record their verbal feedback that they're given in sessions? Has anyone got anything that they do, or that they have used, or that they would like to try?
Sometimes it can be useful, like say if you've used a whiteboard, an electronic whiteboard, and maybe you've been answering questions through the session. Sometimes it's one of the things I do. I will put the question and maybe a response to it on like a little square, almost like an equivalent of a post-it note, and put it near the section of the work that we've been doing. And then what I tend to do is, if we do something like that, I'll either provide a link to the student so they can go back to the actual whiteboard and link to it that way, or I tend to as well, because it can be hard for people to actually connect with it, I tend to reproduce it as a PDF as well. So then that will get sent out as an email. So they've got both options then. And if you leave the link open, it allows them to actually, if you share it, they can then put their feedback on there, and you can build a little bit of a picture then.
Yeah, I love that idea. of putting kind of specific questions and feedback and sharing that with the group. Sometimes there are certain things that we can feedback to everybody. So our feedback is usually individual, isn't it? We're giving feedback on specific performance. But if most of our group or all of our group have a specific area that they still need to work on, we can address that as a group and support everybody. And I love that idea of, you know, recording it that way and providing different opportunities to access that feedback in different ways. So that's really beneficial. Any other thoughts on how learners, when they're given verbal feedback, can record that?
I asked them to, we do the tutorial, and then I asked them to fill in the tutorial themselves and load it up onto Canvas.
Yeah, fab. Yeah, so that can be great, can't it? Utilising the tools that we've got, such as tutorials, in order to, and the learner then is getting the feedback from you. They're having to process it and summarise it in their own words by putting it on there. And you can do that in any type of verbal feedback situation. I used to have a verbal feedback stamp in my classroom, and I'd be giving feedback on what someone had done, and I'd stamp to say that they'd had verbal feedback, but they would have to then, underneath the stamp, write what I told them, what they needed to do to improve, what they've done well. And that, again, is getting them to summarise in their own words, which cognitively will support them to retain that feedback as well. And it's also their evidence on their work. So that can be
set up the tutorial form for them to make their own SMART plan.
Yeah, so that's great. That's great. Fantastic. I can see that we've got some comments in the chat here about self-assessment forms, where the learner self-assesses their performance. And yeah, it's got room for your feedback as well, Helen, so that's great. Sometimes it's really good to see what learners think they're doing well and what they need to improve on, because that can be sometimes the same as what we think and sometimes different. It might give us an idea of where their confidence levels are with certain things too.
I also will ask things like, how long did you spend? What kind of effort did you put in? Because if they know that they've done it at the last minute and they haven't really spent a lot of time on it, then chances are it's not going to be a great piece of work. So it's sort of for them to understand, you know, did you go through, how many drafts did you go through, and that kind of thing, to get a sense of how much effort they've put into it, so that then they realise themselves, I need to do a bit better, I need to put more into it.
Brilliant. And that's also supporting them with that metacognition, learning about learning. What do I do? Not just how well do I know the content, but how well do I learn? How well do I prepare? How well do I plan, etc. Use time management. All of those things are really, really important skills for our learners. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's great that you support learners with that too, and hopefully we see that and we can ask learners to write that reflection down or put it somewhere. Really nice idea. Great, thank you so much everyone for sharing. I know we haven't been able to get to everybody. If you've got any other thoughts about when and how learners act on their feedback, what you do in the session or outside of sessions, please populate the chat. It'd be great to share with other people what you do. So let's have a look then, our objectives for this part of the session. This one is a bit shorter than the other ones. So to explain the difference between formative and summative assessment, list 3 formative assessment strategies. This is the wrong one. It's not on the right slide. Hold on 1 second. I was thinking then that's not right. Where's my slide? Is that right? Here we go. There we go. Sorry. Can you all see that still? Yeah, great. So here we go. We've got analyse feedback strategies for strengths and areas for development. So you had a reflective task at the start. just to think about your own strategies, analyse those, decide, you know, is there anything I could do differently? We've thought about different methods of providing feedback in the classroom. So we've thought about verbal feedback, written feedback, peer evaluation, self-assessment, what learners should do with their feedback. So are they given time in session? Are they reflecting on it? Are they making improvements? And thinking about those strategies that support us to give that regular, timely feedback. Feedback is so important for the progress of our learners. So making sure that we've got those things in place. Okay, we're coming to the end. Thank you so much for being part of the session today. I know there's been lots of us and I haven't been able to speak to everybody. It's a spiky profile, isn't it? It's like a class with our learners. I don't know what you teach yet. I don't know how long you've been teaching, whether you're new, whether you know, this is sucking eggs for you. But hopefully it's been beneficial. Hopefully you've taken something from it. I'm Cara Turner. I'm the Quail for the Northwest region. So I developed this session today to begin our development and CPD journey. Okay, so it's not the last you'll see of me. I would really welcome anyone who would like support, anyone who would like some CPD. I'll be doing learning walks and observations throughout the year, so you will see more of me. And it's a supportive and developmental process. Okay, so I'm here to help you make the best of your sessions, to help learners make progress, because really, ultimately, it's about them and the experience that they're getting. So I'm here to help. If you would like anything from me, please do get in touch. Just drop me an email. It's cturner@wea.ac.uk. And thanks again for your time. Thanks for participating. And I will see you hopefully at the next one.